It is the 31st of May, 158 days until the election. And this morning, Donald John Trump, the former president of the United States, is a convicted felon, found guilty on 34 felony counts by a jury of his peers in Manhattan District Court. There is a question at hand, and it's this: what now? What next? What happens next? Not for nothing, there are some very popular television shows in the culture. One of those franchises is called Law and Order. And a lot of the Law and Order franchise takes place in a Manhattan courtroom. And so for the last 2 decades, many scores of millions of Americans have seen Law and Order episodes and the administration of justice portrayed in New York City with juries on their television sets. This is not a podunk small town courtroom. This is Manhattan, New York City. And yesterday, a trial concluded, like many trials concluded in America, with a guilty verdict. The difference between the Trump trial and all of the other trials that concluded with guilty verdicts yesterday is that only one outcome has triggered denunciations of the American justice system by the whole of the elected leadership of a political party in a country where the rule of law is supposedly supreme. Let us understand that this is a dangerous moment for the nation. And the hour we have arrived at is a beginning. We are setting off now into an uncharted space. There is nothing comparable that has ever happened in American history that prepares us for this moment. A great crisis in faith in our institutions, a great testing at hand for the American people, for our democracy. Courage is the first political virtue. Restraint is the first political wisdom. Courage and restraint must operate together. We have come miles and miles down the river together as a nation since Michael Flynn led this unhinged chant at the Republican convention in 2016. I was on set at MSNBC, and I commented at the time as a crowd of delegates representing the third oldest political party in the world chanted, "Lock her up, lock her up, lock her up," a mob screaming for the Democratic nominee for president of the United States to be jailed. It was a sign that we were heading into deep and troubled waters. And we are far, far down the river now. The hour we have arrived at is one where senators and governors are openly and nakedly calling for retribution and revenge. Sean Davis, a MAGA whack job extraordinaire, the editor of The Federalist, tweeted this: "The calls for revenge are everywhere." A man who is speculated about as a Trump attorney general has talked about the need to publish lists of Democrats who will be imprisoned. Where does the retribution stop? How does it stop? That's the thing about revenge and retribution. Once the cycle starts, it's very difficult to stop. And the question at hand is, where are the voices of restraint? Where are the voices talking about this moment with calmness? About 50 years ago, in a year of abject chaos in the United States, The United States of America did something remarkable towards the end of the year. It was a year where the Tet Offensive showed Americans that the war in Vietnam could not be won. It was a year where Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were assassinated, where there was chaos and riots in the street. And yet, this country, our nation, kept moving forward. It kept exploring. And in December of 1968, the Apollo 8 mission launched. And for the first time, human beings left the orbit of the Earth. In a procedure called a trans-lunar injection, the 3 NASA astronauts headed off into space, traveling hundreds of thousands of miles through it to the moon. The view of Earth was in the rear view. What lay ahead was unknown. And there was a period of darkness where there was no communication. As the space capsule came around the dark side of the moon, all communication cut off. Nobody knew what would happen. And then the most famous photograph ever taken in human history was shot. Earthrise. It was the first moment when humanity saw the Earth as a whole set against the blackness of space, showing what we all shared in common. The point of the story is as the astronauts went to the moon and as they returned to the Earth, they were in uncharted territory, uncharted space. And that is where we find ourselves now. A former president of the United States did something terrible in 2020. He lost an election and then he denied the result. He did not concede the election. He did not do his duty. He breached his oath and he turned a mob against the American people. That mob ransacked the Capitol of the United States. Just like these senators and members of Congress are ransacking, vandalizing the American judicial system. Do you remember the OJ trial? Can you imagine the reaction of these people, Ted Cruz, John Cornyn, all of these people, if Black leaders had come out and said what they are saying about the American judicial system if O.J. Simpson had been convicted? What would they have said if Louis Farrakhan said what Ted Cruz is saying? What would they have said if Al Sharpton said what Josh Hawley is saying? It's pretty predictable because, of course, this was the party that literally made a federal case out of a sexual act. The truth of the matter is a dangerous moment, a dangerous hour has arrived. And it is clear as day because these are promises, these are threats. Handing power to people promising retribution is a guarantee of disaster. There has never, and I mean never, been a political party or cause that was built on a foundation of retribution that when it took power didn't keep those promises. This extremist fascist movement intends to keep the promises of retribution. They will use the IRS to silence opposition. They will target businesses. They will affect contracts. The heavy hand is coming down. Should these people take power? Restraint is not something that's talked about very often. But this moment calls for a type of restraint. Where does this all go? And who will speak to the next 10 years, 20 years? The truth of the matter is, Democrats in Washington, D.C. are terrified. They're terrified that Joe Biden is losing this election, and he is. There's been a question that has been staked to the ground for quite a while now. It's a hypothetical. What would the reaction be of the American people should it be the case that Donald Trump was found guilty of felonies by a jury in a trial? Upwards of 20% of the electorate that was considering voting for Trump, according to the polls, would have serious doubts. And now that's not a hypothetical question anymore. The answer is at hand. And so the polling that will be out this time next week, that starts this Sunday night, that accumulates over 1,000 samples, will tell us what the immediate impact in the aftermath of this trial is, if anything. And remember, the Hunter Biden trial starts next, and revenge is in the air. Where this leads is someplace terrible. This is a spin that it is difficult to recover from, to pull out of. What comes next? Nobody knows. Because like the Apollo 8 capsule, we are in uncharted territory. Here in 2024 America, elections aren't accepted, and neither are jury trials. It means something big, and it portends something terrible, something that is forming, something that is coming. This is The Warning. I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning, and I invite you to subscribe on our Substack, on our YouTube channel. Follow us. Welcome to the community.